Hello, how do you feel about being on my crispy iPhone camera instead of on my laptop? February is over. It's been a weirdly short month. January felt incredibly long, and I'm going to talk to you about what I read in Feb. Sorry if you can hear planes going overhead. The very, very broad theme is books where people disappear. Now, I'd say for Glyph by Ali Smith, Prairie, Oyster by Sophie Robinson, and maybe Paradise Rockford by Jenny Hval. I feel like it fits really well. For Orange by Curtis Garner and Fire in Every Direction by Tareq Baconi, definitely not. Which is why this is about books where people disappear and then they find themselves. I think using that framework, you have some very interesting different takes. Most of these came out in Feb, if not Jan or in March. Prairie Oyster came out in Feb, and Sophie Robinson came in to sign at the bookshop, which was sick. Glyph came out this month, and so did these two, both of whom I was very glad to meet. Paradise Rock, bit of an outlier. I actually thought it was new, because I just never noticed it before, because it's just got this, it's just kind of tiny, but it's been out for a couple of years, and it's a good mix. We've got a memoir, something that might not be a memoir, but might have shades of being a memoir. Likewise, Orange, I think you could put in a similar camp. Paradise Rot is more of a kind of horror vibe. Feb has been very fun. I would like to put here the Valentine's display that I was very proud of in the bookshop. Isn't she gorgeous? She's very pink. Lots of love. I had a lovely little sushi date in Canary Wharf, which was very cute. I did a few other cool things, insert clip, and yeah, let's talk about Glyph by Ali Smith. Look at my dinner! Look how yummy! Prawns! Prawns and awesome! First bite. You know, courgette rarely hits the way I want it to. This is a mukbang. A book mukbang. A mukbang. Okay, so Glyph is about two sisters called Petra and Patricia, or Patch, as her elder sister calls her. For the first half of the book, we follow Petra, who is a gay audiologist, the ear thing, whatever the ear job is. And Petra is remembering the stories that were told to her as a kid. And there are two distinct stories that are laid out in the first two chapters of the book. The first one is that Patch and Petra's grandfather had known someone in the war who freed a horse because he was blind and they were going to shoot the horse. Freed a horse from his regiment, and because he had dishonoured his regiment, the officer was shot at dawn. He was blindfolded and shot at dawn. The second story is a story that was shared to the two children when they were very young, at a family gathering. This old lady had turned to Patricia and Petra and had said, "I've never told anyone else this, girls, but I've decided I'm going to tell you." They don't know who this lady is, they just know she's a friend of the family. And she tells them that when she was in the war, she had been a spy and had been carrying important documents across a border. She'd been on a motorbike, and as she was going along this mountain road, she found what looked like just a shape in the road and appeared to actually be a flattened human body. And she's telling this to two little girls, and the girls are then holding her hands, she's squeezing their hands, and they have to just carry on with their lives, having been told this story that she's apparently told no one else. So out of nowhere in her adult life, Petra starts remembering these stories, and it quickly becomes apparent that the story really traumatized these two girls. They created an imaginary friend called Glyph, spelt like that, which literally means symbol or something engraved on a surface, much like the body flattened on the road. And Glyph is very unclear at first whether or not he's really there. The girls hear the other one talking about how they saw Glyph and spoke to him, but all he could say was Glyph, which was his own name, but he can telepathically talk to the sisters. And to make themselves feel better about this story that they've heard, they go back and forth and they create a huge amount of lore around this figure. And the story quickly shifts from being a factual thing that this lady told them into being its own story, which has haunted the main character for the rest of her life. And that is fundamentally what the book is about, is the way that narrative haunts us. And Petra is so obsessed with this and the stories that they made up with Glyph that she starts digging around online, trying to find any information about someone who was flattened on the road. And she so quickly realizes how impossible it is to find that one person. Likewise with the horse that was let run free, Petra can't find any information about a man who was shot for that, but she finds hundreds of other stories that are similar. And so even though you have no concrete facts about that one story, you know that there is an inherent truth to it, much like all of the stories that they make up around Glyph that don't really have any truth are true in their own way, because of how that story has helped them and how plausible the stories are. This book just made me think about so much in my own life and the way that we tell ourselves stories to create our own sense of reality and identity. I've never read any Ali Smith before, but I definitely will read more. I know that this book has a kind of relationship to her previous book, Glyph, spelt Gliff, because it's referenced quite a lot in this book as kind of a separate thing. Petra reads it because her sister sent it to her and she doesn't actually think much of it as a book. So it's quite metatextual. Sorry, you're just hearing the sounds of my prawns. Praundering. This book was absolutely genius. I mean, almost every other page I folded over because there was a line that I wanted to read to you. But I can't possibly do all of those. All I can say is that the writing style is incredible. It's so full of those little observations that you kind of have always thought, but you've never seen laid out in words before. She's doing very interesting things with tense. Specifically, it's a bit, whatever, it's a bit technical, but she's doing something very interesting with using the past tense in the future. So she lays out some examples of the past in the future tense. Will they have remembered her? They will have remembered something. The door must not have been opened in a month. Will the battery have died soon? Will we have called the doctor? Won't he have expected a uniform? She will have died for love. It's that interesting thing of using the past tense in the future, kind of like a ghost in the language, right? Prawn. So story in the book is a way of creating ghosts. There's an interesting section where Patricia, the younger sister, in the second half, which follows her, talks to her daughter Billy. Billy is very much Ali Smith's idea of the kind of pretty on the money, correct, but also very intense, and I would say she thinks overly politically active Gen Z. Because AI doesn't really bring people back from the dead. Yes, it does. But not really, Patricia says. They're not really there. It's a machine projection. And your sister really did bring back someone from the dead, Bill says. Well, no, not exactly. More imaginatively than actually. So, same as AI, says Billy. So Petra is remembered by her sister as having created and brought back dead people by talking about them and doing these kind of imaginative conjurings. To make Patricia feel better as a kid, Petra would pretend to dial a line and speak to the dead. But she was pretending to make Patricia feel better. Patricia remembers it as Petra could speak to ghosts. And even though she couldn't actually, and they both know she couldn't actually, she still feels like they created living beings and they brought them back through this medium of story. It all gets a little bit ambiguous when Petra, in the modern day, having now started to research the story of the horse that gets freed by her grandfather's friend, wakes up one day to find a horse in her room, destroying the whole place. A blind horse. Because of the way it explores story, Ali Smith didn't want to write a book that had a fixed beginning, middle and end. And as a result, the ending was for me a little bit unfinished, which was intentional, I'm sure. I was basically reading it so excitedly and happily and having such a good time that I didn't even really notice that the book was ending, and then it was over. And is that not how we live our lives? So this book forces you to confront the immensity of death, because there are figures that you can be told about through family stories that you can't find concrete proof of. You can't Google them and find those stories, but you know that they exist as stories because they're passed down in you and in your DNA and in your personal mythology. But when we die, we are not preserved as actual ghosts of ourselves. We are preserved like an AI would preserve a person by creating stories around them, conjuring their voice and their face for other people, in the minds of other people, but not necessarily as a continuation of that one person. It's great, it's genius. It's totally genius. I would really, really recommend reading it. It's just incredible prose, it's funny, and yeah, makes you feel really good about your place on this planet. Let's talk about Orange by Curtis Garner, which also came out in Feb. In Curtis's words, this is a book for all those who struggle with home and all this strange word encompasses. I feel like I read this book at exactly the right point in my life. It's about a 21-year-old moving to London from a small town on the coast of England. He's called Daniel Orange, and he flips between chapters remembering his time in Cornwall, where he fell in love with a teenager called Jago, And in the present day, Daniel welcomes Jago to London to see his new East London life, and he reckons with the difference in himself. And you feel that this is a very, very insecure character. Daniel Orange is incredibly shy. The chapters in Cornwall are very, very almost sort of frustratingly passive. And the chapters in London completely assert Daniel's new life in this kind of defensive way, where he's showing Jago the life he's found in East London and almost implying to Jago, look, I've made it, I found myself. But it's in this defensive way where you kind of feel like he's sort of lost himself as well. There's a passage that reads, Daniel Orange is really two people now. The one he was before moving to London and the obsessively self-optimising one he has become since. He often remembers himself as a teenager in Cornwall, as if he were a little brother he's left behind there. He sometimes half convinces himself that he can cope with these two existences, this splitting of himself across time and place. His feelings of anger, placelessness, loneliness have developed their own separate mass in the years following his teens, feelings Daniel tries to process by thinking of them as belonging to a separate person, or, in other words, by not processing them at all. He has tried to shut down the part of his life that he experienced in Cornwall. And you realise as the book goes on that that's because not only did he have a very troubled family dynamic with an alcoholic mother and an abusive father, but also many, many feelings of grief are tied to that time. And I thought it really did a fabulous job of exploring that kind of early 20s disconnection with yourself as a teenager. Not to obviously read myself into anything ever, but you realise that he's come to associate Jago, this really sweet, positive, Cornish guy, with that time in his life and with who he was. And it creates these really awkward and uncomfortable scenes between them in the present day. Daniel, since moving to London, has been a right slag and has been going around on all sorts of little hookups. And there's a very strange kind of, not feeling of cheating necessarily, but of kind of insecurity around that, because he and Jago have never put a label on their relationship, but also both feel a bit weird about him sleeping around in London. They go to a party together in London, and one of the guys that Daniel has been seeing, who's called Augustine, appears at the party, and they start doing a whole load of drugs together in a bedroom. And Jago is at this party and is obviously so heartbroken, because even though he's not with Daniel, they're special with each other. They're kind of meant to be together. And I really would recommend reading it. It's a great one for recognising insecurity in yourself, for reconciling the person that you have been with the person that you are, for lovely, lush, flowery descriptions of Cornish landscapes. So here is the first line. The sky is pink syrup, and the sea below quivers like a pane of restoration glass, so calm that in places it resembles more sky. Looking out across it, he feels unlike a real person. He's not trapped here, but neither can he picture himself leaving. He has nowhere else to exist. The writing style isn't for everyone, I don't think. The Cornish chapters are much more purple prose, flowery, and I personally would read that as the kind of 16-year-old optimism and youth and drama that you can often have as a teenager. Whereas the London chapters are really gritty, drugs, blood, grime. You realise that the two of them, Jago and Daniel, are actually incredibly bad for each other. There's a kind of small town insecurity to their relationship. The idea that they were perfect for each other in that one setting, but that actually they bring out each other's kind of defensiveness in as adults. So a lot of this book is just mourning that first relationship, which, you know, we've all been absolutely destroyed by our first queer flings. It's a good one for, really wallowing in that, moving past it, and finding yourself on the other side. Sorry, I'm just closing my window. Okay. Do you want to talk about Paradise Rot? I bet you do. Paradise Rot by Jenny Hval, incredible Norwegian singer, who I was not aware of previously to this book. This is her first, and I think only, novel. It's a wee little novella, and it's very weird. This follows a Norwegian international student who moves into a warehouse with this girl called Carol. The international student is called Joanna, and she's nervous, she's shy, but she feels that she's drawn to this girl, Carol. Carol is a kind of beautiful, quite gregarious and social blonde girl. And here, our very, very tenuous theme of people who disappear and who find themselves. As the book goes on, the two of them slowly rot into their gross warehouse environment. I have a few things that I definitely need to talk about right off the bat. And that is, why is there so much urine? Now, call me old-fashioned, but I'm not one for necessarily a surprise piss kink. But I don't know if I'd even call this a kink thing. I think it's just a choice. Let me read you a section. So, Joanna has come to this small English town to be a student. It's almost an island, very coastal. She struggles to find a flatmate, and that's mainly because she doesn't speak much English. And I hadn't really read a book from a international student perspective, but specifically, I've never really read anything from a Norwegian perspective. Now, let me read this bit for you. This is 2 pages in. The mirror reflected my belly and hips, and I stood there like a man and unzipped my trousers with my front facing the toilet bowl. It felt almost strange not to have a dick to pull out through my fly. When I rolled my jeans and pants down my thighs, the dark triangle of pubic hair looked strangely empty, like a half-finished sketch. I turned around, sat down on the toilet seat, and looked down between my legs, where a thin stream of urine trickled into the bowl. The dirty white porcelain was tinged with acrid yellow. Almost ashamed to flush away all that colour, I thought. Fascinating. Pretty interesting choice. This is translated, I believe. Yes. And I kind of love it. You could say it's got a sort of Bukowskian, what's that fucking annoying stupid word that people use? Verisimilitude. I told you. You could say it has a Bukowskian verisimilitude. We all piss. Now, what I do feel like is a bit more of a departure is when she's started to live in the warehouse with Carol. And much of this book is just sort of very sensory descriptions of this quite dingy, disgusting warehouse that she lives in with Carol. Sometimes she will wake up and Carol has climbed into bed with her. Now you're thinking, great, love this for my lesbian literary fiction. But no, because just you wait. She does write really impressively the slightly disturbing space between sleep and consciousness. There's a lot of sequences in this where we go from being in a dream to being awake. And I'm going to read you one now. In her dream, she smells some beer. It must have been beer. The smell was heady, and the steam had filled the whole room and made my skin moist and sticky. Suddenly the workers had all turned to me. She's imagining she's in a brewery, because that's where it's technically a brewery where they're living in. They all had Pim's face. The guy that sort of interested in her. They started to sing. Their voices sounded like the rush of a waterfall. The song stuck to the inside of my throat, as if it really was liquid, as if I was in a beer barrel. Joe, they sang. Joe, Joe, Joe. Joe, something whispered in the dark. I must have fallen asleep again. Half of me was wet. The skin down one side was warm and damp. Carol? I whispered. She was behind me on the mattress, this time close to me and naked, and I could feel her crying. I turned around, fumbled in the dark, found her head and stroked her hair. Her scalp was wet. What is it? I asked. She didn't answer. Her upper body undulated with sobs. First I thought I was soaked in sweat, but when I woke up properly, I realised the sharp, bitter smell of urine. A thin, warm stream trickled against my thigh from Carol's body. What are you doing? I said, and sat upright. My top and pants were dripping wet, my duvet warm, wet, and I can't, Carol whispered. I felt the stream on my thigh become more powerful, as if she'd given up trying to hold it in. The liquid trickled in between my legs. Can't hold it. Now, aren't you glad that I read you that? I bet you are. I can just feel it. Do you want another one? Good morning. Is the bath free now? She nodded hello and shuffled past me and disappeared up to her mezzanine. When I went into the bathroom, it smelt faintly of urine, and the liquid in the toilet bowl was the colour of melted butter. Carol hadn't flushed. When my stream hit the surface, it bubbled, and as I peed, I looked down between my legs and watched the two liquids mixing. Now, isn't that lovely? So what you're meant to feel is that as these two are living together, they are slowly rotting, becoming codependent, and the relationship that they have is in some way infected. And this is where the title Paradise Rot becomes quite interesting, because you have this recurring idea of apples that Carol is bringing home and leaving to rot because she's buying them in such huge quantities. Girl loves apples. Girl isn't eating them quick enough. But as the apples rot, they both kind of realise that they like the scent of these rotting apples. And this is because they're in a toxic relationship where they're completely dependent on each other. They're not leaving the house. Carol has started just waking up, sleeping, living in her own filth, because she's so warm and cosy and happy in her relationship with Joe. Joe is obviously concerned for her, but is not doing anything to stop it at this point. What Jenny is essentially writing, and I think I don't want to dismiss it all as like piss kink weirdness, because she is making a really great point, which is that you have this image of the apple, which, you know, Eve's apple is, it's lust, it's sin, it's desire. It's fundamentally desire, the desire to taste something else, to take a bite of that thing, and in that discovering lust. That is the story of Eden, right? What Jenny is saying is that that apple, that fruit of knowledge, can rot. And what happens when it rots? When it becomes toxic and in some ways ferments into an alcoholic kind of substance, much like in a brewery, which is where they're living. What happens then? You become intoxicated by that fermentation. It has something in it that draws you in, and leaves you stuck or addicted. So that's pretty great. I would say that actually this book does fit this disappearing people theme. They start to become fungal, and Joe, this character, studies fungi, and you realise that increasingly Carol is becoming like the mushrooms growing on the wall of her bathroom. It's a very ambiguous ending. I would encourage you to read it, but what I took from it was that Joe recognises how toxic this is, exits the relationship, and Carol is last seen with a shaved head, white skin, like a kind of fungus, growing out of the wall of their shower. Now that is pretty weird, but I feel like some freaky people will like this. Like, maybe I do like this. Not saying I like the piss stuff, but hey, whatever floats your boat. Now, this is definitely not a book that I feel like I should push into any sort of theme. But in February, I read Fire in Every Direction by Tareq Baconi, which I feel like if you're going to read any of these books, I think you should read this memoir. It's absolutely gorgeous. It is really heavy without ever making you feel like it's too much. And it is political, but in a way that can only really be explored through the personal. So that's what it does. It just takes, firstly, Tareq's experience of homophobia in the Middle East, and also his experience as an immigrant and as a Palestinian in the world. I suppose the main thing that this book really forces you to think about is we're often thinking about Palestinians in the Gaza Strip at the moment, of course. But what this book really says is most Palestinians in the world are not in Palestine. Most of them have fled a generation, this generation, 2 generations ago, 3 or 4. And I almost feel like Curtis Garner's preface is more suited to this book than to Orange. The quote, "For those who struggle with home and all that strange word encompasses." So there's 3 generations. There's Tareq's own life, which is primarily between Jordan and London. You have his mother's life, which is mainly around Lebanon. Then you have the stories passed down to him from his nan, his tate, who remembers Palestine and fleeing Palestine when she's very young, in her 20s, bringing with her a cross. His family are Christian, and he's very open about the fact that their Christianity served them very well when they moved countries, that they weren't forced into slums. He's also very open about the fact that he grew up quite middle class, obviously had lots of friends who weren't, but that he had a preferable experience because of that. And it's just interesting to read that, because even within that, there's so much insecurity and flight and constant instability, even within this family that are quite well off. There's this constant recurring image throughout those 3 generations, in the stories that his mother, his grandmother, he tells. There's a constant image of a packed suitcase left on the stairs with the kids' toys, books, some food, passports, always ready to be picked up and taken if they have to leave quickly. And in every time it's mentioned, that suitcase is eventually used when crisis befalls his family and suddenly they're hunting out Palestinians in Lebanon or in Jordan. There's a great quote about this book, which I'll find for you. This is by Isabel Hamad. Tareq Baconi refuses to separate the story of sexual identity from the story of political commitment, and in doing so models a way to see our personal struggles as intertwined with our collective ones. I think that perfectly sums it up. There's 3 stories. There's the geopolitical story, there is the familial story, and there is the personal sexual discovery story. In fact, most of this book is about his relationship with his best friend called Ramsey as they were growing up. He writes from the present day with these letters that he and Ramsey sent each other, having kind of fallen in love but never really said it. Ramsey is very set against his and Tareq's societies for being so backwards, is, as he calls it, about things like sexuality and gender. And as Tareq then discovers, going on a course at Cambridge later on in his life, he finds that actually the way that Ramsey talked about the Middle East is something that is a kind of colonial idea that he's internalized. And much of this book is Tareq struggling against his internalized ideas about the Middle East, which have been imparted by colonial powers and which he slowly dismantles in himself. It's about finding love for his country, despite it being a society that more heavily rejects his sexuality. Which, there's so many layers of complexity to that the fact that it's just explored in this really beautiful and simple prose is so impressive. Really interesting explorations of language in this as well. It feels strange comparing them, but like in this one, Jenny Hval explores how she doesn't understand the words even for Norway in English. It's similar in this. In several cases, Tareq will write in Arabic and not in English where it's appropriate, or exclamations. Says that he's relearning his mother tongue and learning to accept it for its greater prejudices in places. Palestine to Lebanon, Lebanon to Jordan, from Jordan to where? It is easy for me to claim flight as my rite of passage, a completion of our lineage, joining millions of others in making homes for themselves in strange lands. But Ramsey's eyes rest on me as I type these words. His admonishment burns into my back, calling me to confront the hypocrisies, the lies we tell ourselves. He is, as always, correct. What right do I have to speak of flight? I've survived no wars. My scars are invisible, my moment privileged. More than 2 decades on, and I still defer to him. It is the journey of gradual estrangement, of alienation that I'm trying to convey. The feeling of not belonging that came to permeate my days. The conviction that one must remain hidden to live, masked, covered. The inner bifurcation, the double consciousness, the exile of the authentic self. Bifurcation? Double consciousness? It sounds like we have a similar theme in this one to we do here, because some stories are universal, even in their strict personal uniqueness. I have one last book to talk to you about. Are you excited? You better be, because it's time to drop any depth from the previous book. It is Prairie, Oyster by Sophie Robinson, which also came out in February. Now this is not a book by anyone, about anyone who might be quoted on the back of the book. In fact, when Sophie came in to sign books, maybe she said midway through the conversation that it definitely wasn't about anyone. And I'm sure it's not about anyone at all. This is a book about a filmmaker, an experimental filmmaker who is an addict. She teaches at a university on a film course, and she is midway through creating a film about forgotten, disappeared in the annals of history film star Veronica Lake. She's become obsessed with Veronica Lake after hearing that this huge film star had completely disappeared, and her ashes had actually been discovered in a small town's charity shop. She writes, "At 21, Pearl could not understand how it was possible for someone to disappear like that. What mistake had been made for one of the most well-known faces of the most well-known period of film history to end up lost and alone, dust and bone amidst the bric-a-brac? It monstered her late at night, half drunk and wide-eyed in bed next to her gently snoring girlfriend. The canister of bone and ash, homeless and floating across America. How did it get there, and how does a person get loved so hard and end up disappearing all the same?" Pearl, this filmmaker, sets out to write a movie about her, but at first you're not very sure if she actually cares that much about this film, because fundamentally Pearl is obsessed with a filmmaker who is older, more famous and experienced, more wealthy, non-binary, New York-based lesbian cult hero whose name is Mitch Myers. And because Pearl is obsessed with Mitch Myers, she really, really wants to have a project that she's working on that will interest Mitch. Mitch invites Pearl to interview them at their event at the South Bank Centre in London. And at this event, Pearl is sort of introduced to Mitch's circle and is enamoured by their presence and their art. And what we read into this ability for time to bury people who even are so famous of their era that they can still manage to be reduced to nothing over time is that really Sophie Robinson is pointing out the futility of fame. Because the book explores fame, and you can even read it into the title of the book. You know, Pearl, Prairie, Oyster. Very feminine, glamorous, but also expensive connotations. But then when you add Prairie Oyster, that's obviously a hangover cure. You have an egg, Tabasco, whatever the hell else you do. I'm not doing all of that. Have a glass of water. That brings those connotations of femininity, elitism, luxury into contrast with addiction, alcohol, and also the kind of very human embarrassment of a hangover. And really that's what this book is. It's a constant hangover. Pearl is on a self-destruction mission. She's a very frustrating main character. She gets a grant for a film and obviously immediately spends all of it on tickets to go to New York to see Mitch, tickets to go to LA to make Mitch jealous, and then tickets back to New York to stalk Mitch. And you see all of her messages to Mitch, many of which get one-word replies. She'll spend 10 minutes trying to take the perfect picture of her bagel and coffee that she thinks that Mitch will like, sending it out with the perfect message, and Mitch just goes, okay, or nice. And it's like, yeah, because Mitch is very famous and successful and old and really isn't interested in you, girl. But they do have sex quite a lot. So it's not the nicest depiction of Mitch's character. but also you're very aware that Pearl is reading into things that aren't there. Mitch then says as much, and Pearl goes completely off the rails, addiction central. And it's tricky. It is tough, because one of the things that unites their relationship, Mitch and Pearl, is that they're both trying to be sober. And Mitch has been sober for a very long time. Pearl, in getting rejected by Mitch, kind of feels it's all right to then completely go in the other direction in terms of addiction. Goes completely off the rails, and will just send message after message to Mitch, and it is so uncomfortable, showing up to places that she thinks that Mitch is going to be too much. Difficult read. I want to read out a really great little bit, probably my favourite bit of this book, which comes from an AA meeting that Mitch is at. Sorry, I'm having a pint. So this is a speech said by someone else in the meeting. A woman who looks like Jesus curls her toes up inside her sandals as she speaks, her knees scissoring open and closed, bouncing off each other in an unpredictable rhythm. An alcoholic falls into a hole. Her friends and family cry and wail, "Please get out of that hole." They buy her a ladder, but she sells it to a passerby in exchange for some vodka. They buy her another ladder, but she does the same thing again. A doctor walks past the hole and throws in some pills. "These will help you feel better about being in the hole," he says. The pills run out and she's still in the hole. A priest walks by and tells her to pray to be lifted out of the hole, so she does, but she's still in the hole. A therapist sits down at the top of the hole and talks to the alcoholic about how she feels about being in the hole. "Were you born in the hole?" the therapist asks. After an hour, he has to leave, but he says he will come back next week. A sober alcoholic walks past, sees the woman in the hole, and jumps in there with her. The drunk woman cries, "What are you doing? Now we're both stuck." With a twinkle in her eye, the sober alcoholic says, "Don't worry, sister. I've been here before. I know the way out." Now that is quite good. I do like that. I think that's a great exploration of addiction. I also think that the frustrating quality of Pearl's character is quite relatable, I think, to lots of people. It's an uncomfortable read because she is absolutely self-sabotaging constantly, but it's still an important exploration, I think. Now, I feel like the parts of the text that are Pearl's character aren't necessarily where Sophie Robinson's writing shines. I think it's an interesting read, but I don't necessarily think it's incredible writing. There are sections which are every other kind of passage, and those are the film that Pearl is making about Veronica Lake, and she does it in the form of a chat show, and an anonymous voice will ask Veronica Lake a question like, "And when you flew to New York, you never did come home. Tell me about that." You know, kind of open-ended questions. And she tells incredible poetic soliloquies to this character. And it's very similar to the way that the daughters in Glyph create this dead, disappeared figure by soliloquizing, creating those personal family memories that totally aren't based in any fact, but are so relatable and human that actually it brings that person back, even if it's not the exact form that they were in. It's creating ghosts. It's an echo of a person or the idea of a person. The voice says, "How fast did you realise you were famous?" Veronica says, "Fast and slow and never fully. At the I Married a Witch premiere, I was trying to get through the crowd and someone shoved me saying, 'Who does that broad think she is? Veronica Lake?' I hated my fame and I hated the way my hairstyle swept across America. I went to see the film alone weeks later. All the women in the crowd had my hair cut. Women's magazines ran articles with instructions on how to get the Veronica look so you could snip out and bring to the salon. I was afraid to be seen, but they all looked so much like me. I just looked like an imitation of myself. I wore my hair slicked back and short from the moment I left Hollywood, but halfway through a shift, a stubborn curl would slide down my forehead and resume its natural position, a veil over one eye. In that moment, a few reflections back, I remember thinking I could almost pass for Veronica Lake. I think that's pretty good. I think I'd recommend it if you're quite into self-destructive main characters, obsessive love. If you're a fan of Eileen Myles, either stay very, very far away or get very, very, very involved. I'll read you some of the final bits of this chat show section. How does it all end? Take me through those final days. It ends how everything ends, slipping into and through this long loop of life and back the way we came. I moved from Florida to Lake Placid for a while. I wanted to go back somehow, further than Miami, back to my childhood, unlacing, undoing, a farewell tour. Then I got sick, yellow and feverish, some devilish ache that grew inside me, and they took me to the big hospital in Vermont. Other days I remember myself in the hospital with baby, all that agony, it's happening again, and I hear somebody crying out for their mother, but it's me who's crying. I tell the nurse I want to go home, and somebody is strapping me down, but I don't want to be tied to anything. You can't go home again, she tells me, and strokes my hair from my eyes, the lake at my window, calm and clear and round as a loop, round as an eye, and closing, closing, closing. Now I think it's pretty good. I think it's pretty good. I don't think it's incredible, but that's only because I think it was a little excessive in the intensity of every line. I think the writing was slightly excessive, and I see the importance of having a frustrating, problematic main character, but I also feel like you need some kind of an arc. And for me, there just wasn't quite enough of one. But I probably will still recommend it to people. So, those were my books in February. Books that got me thinking a lot about the way that we disappear and the way that we come back. Whether that's through stories, whether that's through the people who love us, how colonial ideals form the way we think about ourselves, create ourselves, how we can kind of disappear into our vices and into our bad habits, and how we can re-emerge through other people's retellings of us. Hope you enjoyed this very rambly little video. Next month I'm reading, or this month, March, I'm reading the classic Sunburn. And I think what I'm going to do is make it a kind of like lesbian literary fiction, all the hits style, which is the best kind of thing. That said, I like having kind of very open, broad topics and making things fit them. And I hope you're doing well and that you'll join me for the next one. Okay, much love.